fact, marry that fellow Freddie, who had been courting her since Act Two of the play. Shaw seemed content to treat Liza's marriage to Freddie as a mutually fortunate arrangement, with her being intellectually superior to her husband. In reading through Shaw's script, I kept wondering when he would stop shedding make-believe tears over the unbecomingness of modern marriage and get around to a reflection on the play's ancient Greek story. The idea of a sculptor creating life, creating a beautiful statue, and then, shall we say, breathing life into it, describes a happening all more significant than a mere romance. Or you see, I believe there is no such thing. I'm going to repeat that because it deserves repeating. I believe there is no such thing as a mere romance. Every romance constitutes one of the many set points of individual life. Most critics focus on Liza's sculptured beauty as the quality that led her creator finally to desire her. As an afterthought, I wish to speak at least briefly about Professor Higgins. Without his creativity, Eliza Doolittle would have remained a street peddler of wilting flowers instead of being a lady who was always transcendently beautiful. That may sound a leap of the mind, for obviously, Liza Doolittle was a human being before Higgins transformed her into a generally sculptured, beautiful woman. My point is that as the sculptor of what he saw as perfection, Higgins played God. More critically, Shaw must have seen Higgins, and therefore God, as a being who thought he possessed a perfect sense of what constitutes beauty. But apparently, the God described in the book of Genesis did not foresee what his creatures would do with the beautiful minds he gave them. God wanted his creatures to love him. Instead, they loved each other. What then is the difference between loving God or loving one's creator instead of another human, another person? If we carry forward the symbolism of Higgins as God, what then did Higgins' God mean when he recreated Liza as a symbolic Eve? When instead of loving her God, she sought more pleasing company. Well, entirely possible that Shaw knew he had created Higgins as a character who would eventually be passed off as God. 2 years before he wrote Pygmalion, Shaw wrote the little two-act play, Androcles and the Lion. In the 90-page preface that short play, but still longer afterward, Shaw made clear exactly what he had in mind. Here's what the playwright said. This is a quote about why he wrote Androcles and the Lion. In the play, I have presented one of the Roman persecutions of the early Christians, not as the conflict of a false theology with a true, but as what all such persecutions essentially are. They are only an attempt to suppress a propaganda that seemed to threaten the interests involved in law and order, organized and maintained in the name of religion by politicians who are pure opportunists. Shaw the cynic. In my opinion, Shaw had the same objective 2 years later when he wrote Pygmalion, who, after all, was a creator god. I also cannot imagine a more profound description of 21st century politics, this series, as practiced by the Pygmalions who are at large among us. No modern politician dare confuse a mere mortal with a God they have said as an effective way to maintain order. Although I can imagine a different approach. There's the desire for money. There is in these politicians a desire for money. Shaw did not address that issue. Higgins did not know Liza was already a genuine woman. That's the key to this whole thing. Higgins did not know. Shaw did not know that she was already a genuine woman. And he gave her a more acceptable way to show her beauty to the world. To him, Liza Doolittle existed as an unattractive street urchin. Perhaps it's true that the real God had used Shaw, a make-believe God, as an instrument to transform Liza's low-world appearance and transform her into a princess. But I see from the play that her transformation made no difference to Liza. She already knew who she was. She already knew who she was. And she knew that the actuality of herself had not changed just because she has learned to pronounce perfectly that the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. In every person, not just in every woman, there is an indescribable something struggling to express itself In every person, not just every woman, there is an indescribable quality struggling to express itself. So I'm asking, what form might that something have taken in the mind of Professor Higgins? Shaw led us to see that Higgins saw himself as something like a god. But Shaw himself spoke from a godlike place. As Higgins' creator, he gave Liza a way to fool people into believing she was born into royalty. But that was something she already knew. It was just that her idea of royalty consisted more of what she felt when, by her genius, she coaxed people into purchasing small bouquet of flowers. Yes. And like some of us, she had no idea why she felt as she did about that insignificant economic exaggeration. I'm led to wonder, Mr. Higgins, as he existed in Shaw's mind, saw himself as a creator God. He clearly was overjoyed by Liza's ability to fool an upper class of people into believing she was a member of a royal Hungarian family. And I also wonder if the God many millions of humans have created feels as joyful as Higgins did when he saw the reality of his creation. Near the end of My Fair Lady, as Higgins strolls toward home, he questions himself about this thing humans call love. Questions himself about love. He admits he's pleased by many of the qualities he has bestowed upon Lisa, but he apparently remains convinced that this is what ordinary people call love. His adoration of his creation reaches its peak as he stands before the door of his home, where he almost sees Liza as a human being. But after the very human Higgins passed through the door, he became God again. Hardly a man to be victimized by a faith to which he has merely become accustomed. Earlier in the play, Liza's wannabe lover, Freddie, walks along that same street singing what is perhaps one of the most beautiful love songs ever warbled. And it's played here. He knows that every time he walks this street, he is wafted several stories high. Freddie is an ordinary man. He has no idea what God was up to when he made it possible for a man to be attracted to a beautiful woman. Freddie merely thought he was the luckiest man alive, just to be on the street where she lives. The literature abounds with tens of thousands of similar love stories, most of them ending as Freddie's did. We have only the playwright's word that Freddie eventually married the woman he loved. But Lerner and Lowe, the creators of My Fair Lady, stuck with the 1938 version. After visiting the neighborhood into which she was born, Liza returns to Higgins, suggesting that she is in fact the rain and Higgins is the Spain with which she must remain. Higgins, as God, had nothing but contempt for Liza's suitor, Freddie. To him, Freddie was one of millions fooled by a pretty face. He seemed to have figured a way to excuse himself of the feelings he had expressed while floating above the pavement of that very same street. After all, Liza, with whom Freddie was infatuated, was nothing more than just another of Higgins's or God's creations. There's no way Freddie or Higgins himself would fall in love with a girl whose life seemed all about peddling flowers. But Higgins, like many men, would not let himself be conquered by artificial coquetry, especially if the creature's charms were nothing more than illusory features he himself had created. Higgins was above being smitten by a beautifully organized, a beautifully painted face, a well-made hairdo, and elegant manners. He knew better than any man that the artificiality of such accoutrements. He knew because he had created them. He knew they were artificial. But Shaw himself must have known that there is more to a beautiful woman than we men are able to see. There was always and forever a part of Liza Doolittle, yes, a part of the little flower girl, a hidden quality that could never be seen with the eyes, and perhaps not even with the heart. When a man truly loves a woman, he'll wake up when he realizes he's more than merely attracted to her charms. I mean, of course, if a lady is kind enough to stick around for a decade or so, while the man goes about discovering the beauty of what she really is. And he knows, truly loves. But I cannot imagine Liza's charms, even in their reconfigured form, being able to penetrate, being able to penetrate the armor of Professor Higgins. You see, Liza's sculptor had the world all figured out. He knew that what attracted him to Liza were simply charms that would show up in a photograph. That little song he sung to himself as he strolled toward home essentially said, "I'm attracted to your face." And because the audience left the theater believing that eventually the beauty of the song itself would overpower Higgins' self-centeredness, recreating him as a man who will eventually fall truly in love with Liza. For after all, Higgins was a man. Yes, a man. But after playing God and transforming a little flower girl, would the world acknowledge that he had provided his fellow deities with an object of eternal beauty? In a frivolous moment, I see Higgins in heaven, lounging leisurely upon a fleecy cloud and ordering one of the lesser angels to give up flirting with earthlings and demanding in a petulant voice, "Fetch my slippers." The curtain came down on my fair lady. We had learned that some transcendent ideas come into being by demonstrating their opposite. Higgins was a man in love with himself. That's all I have to say.